Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to give you guys an update on my Amaryllis plants here. So they're just about in full bloom now. It's been about a year since they last bloomed. I do find mine tend to bloom the middle of spring. I think it's just kind of sync more natural with the cycle here in Scotland. The ones I buy from the shops always flower earlier. So the time lapse you saw at the beginning was actually this one down here. This is my most recent addition. This was purchased as just a plant in I think it was around December time, and it flowered around January time. This in the last update you probably saw as having large flower spikes but no flowers. Had two large flower spikes. They're just about ready to be taken away now. I tend to let them shrivel up completely. That just allows the plant to absorb all the nutrients and minerals that is grown into those stems and take it back into the bulb. So I tend to leave them until they're completely dry and then pull them off. But it's looking pretty healthy, very big leaves, and it did flower well. It had two spikes. The flowers were smaller though than my other Amaryllis bulbs. I'm not sure if that's just because this bulb here is slightly smaller or if it's a different variety. I have a feeling it's because of the different variety, because most of my Amaryllis plants, the flowers tend to be a similar size. The bigger the bulb, the more flowers, or the bigger the spike. The flower size himself doesn't seem to vary much with the bulb size. So I suspect that this one will probably have smaller flowers but more numerous flowers. And it's interesting to see the leaves on this one as well are much wider than my normal Amaryllis bulb leaves. It's just a different variety, so it's going to grow slightly differently, but much wider leaves. So this actually has a potential to be possibly a larger plant, unless these leaves are going to be shorter, but I'm not sure yet. The leaves only just started to grow, they're not at their full length yet. It'll be interesting to see how that one does. And that one had that nice kind of pink and white look to the flowers. So the other plants here, they've done really well. This one, these will be potted in my last video, so that might have just set them back slightly. Maybe that's delayed the flowering a little bit because I've disturbed the roots. The only one I didn't disturb the roots on was this one at the far back. But the only difference is that one's grown leaves at the same time as flowering, whereas the two that I disturbed the roots for, they haven't grown any leaves. So you can see down there, there's no leaves at all in them, apart from maybe a tiny, probably about 1 inch worth of leaves just starting to come up there. But generally they haven't really grown any leaves at all. And the one without the disturbed roots has got actually leaves are almost a foot in height now. So I'll go through each bulb individually now and tell you a bit about how it's done in the previous years and how it's doing this year. So originally I had two bulbs, and then one had a little offshoot which then propagated as like a little baby bulb. This was the mother of that baby. This one actually suffered a little bit when I first took away the offshoot because it suffered from rot. That regrew, no problem though, back to a decent size. That happened actually about 3 years ago, so it's not suffering at all from that anymore. But it's flowered well so far. We've got 4 blooms on a single spike. This one the last few years has done 2 spikes with 4 blooms, so it's just keeping up with, it's about the same size basically as what it's been doing previously. There's only 1 bloom at the moment. Now when it comes to flowering, it seems kind of random whether they're going to flower 2 spikes at the same time or 2 spikes one after the other. I do find if they do both flower at the same time, you get a much better display, but then it only lasts about 3 or 4 weeks, whereas if they come up at different times, it just prolongs the flowering period. Instead of having them all at once, you have them staggered. And so these are going to keep giving me flowers for the next month or two. So I'm going to have a nice long display this year, even if it's not quite as showy, because each plant has less flowers open at any one time. But this one down here, as I say, it's got 4 blooms on it now. And some of them are starting to shrivel off a bit. I did have this in a sunny windowsill to try and keep the stems short, and this is getting a bit baked in the sun, so that why this is starting to go over a little bit early. But there is a second shoot coming up in this. It's going to be very hard to show. Hopefully I can show it on the camera. But basically in between these leaves you can see there's a slightly fatter section just coming up in the centre there. That will be the second spike, and as this bulb is quite large, and as in the last few years it's grown 4 flowers on each spike, I suspect this one will grow a new shoot with 4 flowers on it, so that will be a nice size. So I'll go on to the baby of this plant, which was this one on the left here. This is quite a small bulb in comparison. It's probably about half the size of the other 2 bulbs. You can see there, it's not a very large bulb really, but I put it in the same size pot just to keep them all in keeping and matching. So because this is the smaller bulb, I'm only expecting 1 flower spike. There's no way I'd expect a second flower spike from a bulb this size. So last year was the second year that it flowered. The first year that it flowered, it had 2 flowers. Last year it had 3 on the spike, and this year it's got 4. So it's been getting better every year as it's building up its energy reserves, getting more vigorous and getting a bigger bulb. What I'm expecting this to do is going to grow bigger leaves than the last few years, as it's still building up its energy reserves. And I think next year we should even get 2 spikes on this. So we'll probably get 2 spikes, one with 4 flowers, one with 2, maybe both with 3. I wouldn't expect a total of 8 flowers in this because it's quite a small bulb, but certainly my larger bulbs, they always have about 8 flowers on them. But it'll be interesting to see with these bigger pots, especially with these plants that are already big. I'm wanting to see if I can get more than 8 flowers on one bulb. At the moment, 2 spikes is the most we've ever had, but I think there is a potential that I could get 3 next year if they do particularly well. So I'll go on to my last plant now at the back, and that was the one that was struggling the most in the past few years. What seemed to happen is the bulb seemed to get too congested and there wasn't enough space for it to push up new flowers or new leaves. So what was happening is it threw up one flower spike about 3 years ago, but it was all kind of weirdly misshapen. A bit like this one here. This one at the side, you can see there's a bit of a kink on it there. It was like that, but it was a real zigzag pattern the whole way up. This one has only had that section at the top. The rest of the stem's nice and straight. And so it was struggling to grow out these new stems. Basically it was too tight at the top there and couldn't push the growth through. So there was 2 or 3 years without any flowers at all. And when the leaves did grow, they only grew up to probably about this kind of height, and normally they should be about 2 foot long. So it was really struggling, wasn't doing very well. So last year I decided to make a really drastic decision to actually cut the bulb open and kind of separate the top layers to try and allow it to grow through better. It didn't help with the flowering at all, but it did put on a lot more leaves. So I cut down the sides. You can kind of see where I cut it there. It's just kind of got a knife and I split it open. I'll put a link in the iCard on the top right so you can have a look at that video if you'd like. And basically just cut along there. That allowed it to regrow its leaves. It was very slow to get going, but once it got going it did put on a nice growth of leaves. And once it had a good growth of leaves, it could then absorb all that nutrients and start fattening its bulb up again and growing more healthily. Now it didn't flower at all last year, even though the bulb was big enough. I think because it didn't flower for 2 or 3 years, there was quite a lot of energy still in the bulb, but it just wasn't really able to use it because it couldn't push out the growth. Now a lot of the bulb that I cut kind of dried up. That's what these dried bits are on either side of it. But this is now flowered now for the first time in 3 years, and it's also a double spike, so it's looking quite good for the plant. I'll just have to keep an eye on it because, as I say, that one did look a bit disjointed at the top there, a bit crooked, so there's a bit of resistance still in it, but I'm hoping that's just going to naturally push its way out. The leaves and the next flower seem to be absolutely fine, but I need to keep an eye on it in case this plant starts having that problem again. But I'm quite happy with it. It's going to have 2 flower spikes this year. The first one's got 3, as I say. The second one, I'm not sure if it's going to have 4, 2 or 3. You should have at least 5 flowers in total. You can see the new flower spike just coming up down the bottom there. So it's not too far away. Probably another 3 weeks or 4 weeks and that'll be flowering. And the leaves are already a good size. Now by the time that flower spike comes up, I'm probably actually going to have massive leaves. But it's not a big issue. I do prefer it when there's no leaves because I think the leaves take away a little bit from the flowers. I just like a clear stem and then big flowers, but I don't mind too much if there are a few leaves. So that one's really recovered nicely, and hopefully going forward we shouldn't get any more issues from that. So that's about it for this update. I don't think I'll do another update when the other flower spikes come up, because to be honest it's going to look pretty much identical. Normally when the plants produce 2 flower spikes that are quite even with the number of flowers each spike has. So I'm not expecting the show to be any different really. The only difference will be there'll be more leaves, but there'll be the same number of flowers. So I don't think I'll do another update when the new flower spikes come up, but I will take some photos so I can add them to the next update I do, which I will do, which will probably be late summer, either when they're in full leaf to show you how big the leaves have got, or it will be next autumn when they're going into dormancy and just maybe starting to come into their new flowering phase. So that's all for this update. I'm really happy with the Amaryllis this year. They've grown very well. I'm quite happy with the flowers and that, but I think next year is going to be even better because I've given them bigger pots now. They're also in the conservatory, so they're going to get a lot more light, a lot more heat. That should really make them grow much better. Previously I grew these on a north facing window in Edinburgh and the light wasn't great, but I still had great results. So with the extra heat and the extra light, with these being tropical plants, they like lots of sunshine and a decent heat level, so they should grow even better. I'm quite excited to see what will happen. Hopefully they're going to grow bigger bulbs and I might get triple spike flowers, or I might actually start getting more offshoots. I'm not sure what the plants will do with all that extra energy they're going to build up over the summer. But that's all for this video, and I'll see you guys probably in 6 months or a year when it comes to the next update.